Hey everyone, and welcome back to Smoltzy and Friends. Today I'm not sure how to start this episode because it's emotional. But if you've been listening to our podcast over the last 10 months, you know some of our episodes don't start off smooth because of the emotion or even the message. I also want to make a disclaimer that our content is for all ages, so please don't let my opening statement scare anyone off from sharing this episode or any previous episodes. If you know me, I want to make sure our episodes start off with an honest tone, and then we get into the content. I also want to let you know this is a real situation and happened at the beginning of 2026. In the past episodes, I've talked about authenticity, about being open, and not giving the automatic answer, I'm good, when someone asks you how you're doing, especially when you're not. So this Monday morning was supposed to start by driving to Cartersville to visit a colleague and a client. What I didn't know is my granddaughter and daughter were going to the hospital because of her sickness. So here I am torn between going to the appointment I committed or canceling. But if you all know me, especially if you've listened to some of my episodes, if I start something, I finish something. A few minutes later, my colleague called and said the appointment has been rescheduled. This actually turned out to be a blessing. My next move was to call my daughter and see how our little granddaughter was doing. And she said they're running a bunch of tests, but that she'll keep me posted and no need to come down yet. So I decided to see if I could move my Tuesday morning meeting to this morning at 9:30. So I could have Tuesday free or flexible if I needed to be with my granddaughter. And he said yes, but after lunch. Well, a lot of things were progressing at the hospital, and it sounded like she would be there much longer than expected, but they didn't mention anything about admitting her as of yet. I arrived at the appointment, and this is where the God story builds. And I'm going to change the names of the individuals involved to Nick and Kelly, since they don't know I'm making this podcast about them. As I sit down with my client, Nick, who now I only consider a friend, a brother in Christ, and someone who listens to this podcast. But as we sat down and caught up about the break, he asked me two simple questions. But it was the second question that put this podcast in motion. His first question was, "How was your holiday, Smoltzy?" And I answered, and then he followed up by asking, "Smoltzy, how are you doing today, really?" Just as a disclaimer, you'll need to go back to episode 46 to understand the impact of that question, and then listen to a follow-up episode, 69, just to show how long ago these episodes were, because you are currently listening to an episode of 145 today. So I didn't glance over the second question, and I answered it honestly. I said, "My brother in Christ, I have a heavy heart today. And my 10-month-old granddaughter is in the hospital, and they are trying to figure out what she has. The photo I just saw from my daughter before meeting with you was heartbreaking. They're checking so many things, and some of the names sounded very scary." Without hesitation, the first thing he asked me was, "Are you okay, Smoltzy? And please, leave, because family is more important." I said, "I'm good, and no, I don't need to leave." And then he asked me another question. "What is your granddaughter's name so we as a family can pray for her?" I shared it and spelled her last name as he was typing it into his phone. He then said, "I hope you're okay talking about this." And I said, "Yes, my brother, I am." He followed and said, "May I ask you one more question?" And I said, "You can ask me as many as you want. What hospital is she at?" And I told him. Sorry for the emotion. And he paused and said, followed by, "I have some good news for you, Smoltzy. I know someone that works at that hospital that your daughter and granddaughter are at." Nick said one of the other reasons I asked for your granddaughter's name, besides praying, is I was sharing it with my wife, and she works at the same hospital your granddaughter is at. In fact, she, Harper, most likely will be transferred to her floor. At this point, I was struggling to keep my emotions intact, even now recording this, because I'm at a business meeting with a client. And folks, you're hearing everything play out from answering a simple question, but powerful question. How are you doing really, Smoltzy? So I want to pause here for a moment. I could have kept it surface level. I could have said nothing. I could have decided not to burden him with what was going on in my life and continue on with our business meeting. But I didn't. He asked me how I was doing, really. And because I've spent time encouraging others to be open, I felt convicted to live out what I talk about. Now, let me be very clear about something. I don't want this to be misunderstood. There was no intent for preferential treatment, and none was given either, just to be clear. That was never the goal. That's not what this is about. What did happen, though, is this. There are now more people praying for my granddaughter. There is now someone who works in the hospital on that very floor who knows her name and is lifting her up in prayer, and someone who is also a mother that can comfort the patient and my daughter in this case. This was a very scary time for everyone involved, and I will leave out the details. This individual, Nick, reached out to his wife, Kelly, not to pull strings, but to say, please pray. This is for a friend and his daughter and her granddaughter who are at your hospital. And you know what, folks? That matters. This is why I'm recording this episode. You never know how close someone is to your situation. You never know who God has already placed in your life to support you, encourage you, and pray for you until you're willing to be open. This isn't just about a hospital visit. It's about life. It's about the reminder that people are walking around every single day carrying things you can't see. And sometimes all it takes is one honest question and one honest answer for connection to happen. So let me encourage you today. Check in with somebody. Check in with a friend, a coworker, a loved one. And when you do, don't just ask, how are you doing? Please ask them, how are you doing really? And when was the last time you allowed yourself to answer that question honestly? Again, I'm not using the correct names in this episode, but if they are listening right now, you can replace them with your real names. But I want to say a heartfelt thank you to you, Nick, and your brotherhood and caring about another brother and what they were going through. And for contacting your wife, Kelly, and letting her know to pray, and then to find out she works at the same facility my little Harper was at. And for everybody else listening, I hope, my listeners, this opened your eyes, that what Nick and Kelly's impact did, I hope it touched your heart, and that their giving will continue on other people's hearts. This reminds me of an episode 99 that we call Do for One What You Wish You Could Do for Everyone. Well, Nick and Kelly, this is exactly what you did. And I know you're probably saying I didn't do much, but I'm going to spare the details of what happened during the 4 days at the hospital. And just know the presence of prayer and comforting for my daughter and granddaughter in the time of need, no words can explain how grateful we are. For those of you wanting to know how our grandbaby is doing, she was released from the hospital and was treated for Kawasaki and must stay well within the next 3 weeks and have no fever, or she'll have to go back to the hospital. She does have a follow-up appointment with the cardiologist in a couple weeks. So if you can, pray for my little Harper. In closing, I want to thank you for listening and following us in 2025, and I hope you will continue to follow us in 2026. If this message spoke to you, would you consider sending it to a family or friend? You never know how one of our messages can impact someone's life. And I want to thank you for your consideration. Until next time, stay open, stay intentional, and keep checking in on one another.